Welcome to Coffee with Viking. I am Mike. Cheers. Amos, the poor man's prophet. Maybe it takes one to know one. Perhaps that's why God skips over the professional prophets and calls a lowly farmer to deliver what becomes a message so forceful and majestic that civil rights advocates today still quote this man. His name is Amos. He farms and shepherds in a remote village where more than half a day's walk south of Jerusalem. Usually prophets minister in their own countries, but God orders Amos across the border unto the northern Jewish nation of Israel. There is the capital city of Samaria. He delivers a string of prophecies that teaches an unbelievable lesson in theology. Jewish movers and shakers, fat cats and aristocrats have plenty of reason to believe God is smiling on them. After all, they're enjoying peace and prosperity. Many ancients, including the Jews, consider blessings like this a gift from above. And sometimes wealth is a blessing from above, and sometimes what seems like a blessing from above is a curse from the other side to keep you trapped, to give you the more comfortable prison. God himself promised that if the Jews lived in a way that pleased him, they and their descendants would prosper. And that promise was in Deuteronomy 5:29. Deuteronomy 5:29. Oh, that there were such an heart in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it might be well with them and with their children forever. This particular prosperity, however, has nothing to do with God's blessing. Instead, Amos says it has everything to do with rich people exploiting the poor, which we see a lot of nowadays too. Cheating their customers and buying off judges. Amos says this corruption is going to stop one way or another. If the people don't stop it, Amos warns, God will. The Lord will level the playing field. Invaders can do that quite effectively. A few decades later, when Assyrian soldiers line up captive Jews and march them 1,000 miles into exile, the has-been princes with hooks in their noses look very much like commanders. The main point of this book: God is going to punish the northern Jewish nation of Israel for a long list of sins, especially for exploiting the poor and selling justice to the highest bidding briber. The writer, Amos, delivered these prophecies. He describes his job. I do not make my living as a prophet, nor am I a member of a group of prophets. I make my living as a shepherd, and I take care of sycamore trees. Amos 7:14. His grove produces sweet figs. Amos's eloquent writing style suggests he's well educated, or perhaps he has some help from a professional scribe, or it could be the words God gave him to speak and write down. As did Jeremiah, who dictated his prophecies. Some Bible experts say the book's upbeat ending, the last 5 verses, reads like a disjointed add-on that came later, but without those verses of hope, Amos would be the only prophet in the Bible who preached nothing but doom for the Jews. All the others included a promise that God would restore the Jewish nation, and we already know that will happen in the end. It is one of the signs of the end. The date. Amos ministered in the middle to high-numbered 700s BC. He comes first among all the writing prophets whose dates are known. He offers several clues about when he ministered. Uzziah is king of Judah, reigning about 783 to 742 BC. Jeroboam II is king of Israel, about 786 to 746 BC. The time of peace and prosperity for the rich, that's reflected in Amos. And Amos suggests the final decade or so of Jeroboam's reign, perhaps in the 760s BC. 2 years before the earthquake, archaeologists have recently found evidence in city ruins of a massive earthquake in the region during the mid-700s BC. And in Amos 8:9 it said, I will make the sun go down at noon, perhaps a reference to the solar eclipse of 763 BC. The location. Amos lived in the southern Jewish nation of Judah, in the village of Tekoa. That's about a dozen miles south of Judah's capital, Jerusalem. He took his prophecy on the road to the northern Jewish nation of Israel with its capital in Samaria. Amos 1:3. The people of Damascus have sinned again and again, and I will not let them go unpunished. Farmer Amos leaves his sycamore grove and his flock, presumably in someone else's care, and he starts walking north. He walks past Jerusalem and right out of his country, the southern Jewish nation of Judah. 3 days and 50 miles from home, he arrives in Samaria, capital of the northern Jewish nation of Israel. There he begins telling the people about messages he received from God in a vision. At first, the messages must sound reassuring. That's because Amos starts by announcing that God is going to lower the doom boom on 7 of Israel's nearest neighbors. Every oracle against these nations, sometimes represented by their leading city, begins with the same ominous warning for the many crimes of nations. Name inserted. It could be any of the nations against them. I will punish them. Damascus, capital of Aram, and what is now Syria, the Arameans committed war crimes. They dragged logs with spikes over the people. And that was Amos 1:3. Gaza, a leading city of the Philistines in what is now the Palestinians' Gaza Strip. They deported entire Jewish villages and sold many Jews into slavery. Tyre, main seaport city of Phoenicia in what is now Lebanon, ditto the Philistine charge, and at a broken peace treaty. Edom, in what is now southern Jordan, descended from Jacob's brother Esau, and therefore related to the Jews. Edomites fought the Jews and showed them no mercy. Ammon, in what is now northern Jordan, Ammonites committed genocide against the Jews, even cutting open pregnant women in merciless attacks. Moab, in what is now central Jordan, the Moabs desecrated a corpse, burning the bones of Edom's king. Some ancients taught that cremation deprived the person's spirit of the rest of he or she could enjoy from a burial. In Judah, the southern Jewish nation, they disobeyed God's law. Each of these nations is eventually devastated by war, either by Assyrians, Babylonians, or regional armies. By the time Alexander the Great and the Greeks arrived in the 300s BC, all 7 of these nations are gone. Even the Jews controlled by Persians remain in kingless community. Amos 2:6. The people of Israel have sinned again and again, and I will not let them go unpunished. 7. The number of nations Amos addresses is often the perfect number in the Bible because 7 is the number of completion. It is God's number. It's the number symbolizing a job completely finished. God rested on the 7th day of creation, and he told his people to finish each week by resting as well and keeping the 7th and Sabbath day holy. But Amos doesn't stop with the 7 sinful nations. In fact, he's just getting started. Amos has devoted a total of 18 verses to those 7 nations, but up next, Israel all by itself gets that much and 100 verses more. The prophet's bigger complaint is social injustice. Amos complains about oppression of the poor, sexual immorality, corruption, injustice in the courts, selfishness in the worship of idols. Throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New, there's one thing God repeatedly says his people should do: help the helpless. In that ancient society, without organized welfare programs, orphans, widows, and immigrants are especially vulnerable. That's why Bible writers describe God like this: He is the great God, the mighty and awesome God, who shows no partiality and cannot be bribed. He ensures that orphans and widows receive justice. He shows love to the foreigners living among you and gives them food and clothing. That's the model Israel is to follow. Instead, they sell honorable people for silver and poor people for a pair of sandals, and that was Amos 2:6. Perhaps an exaggeration by the point is that rich people are collecting the tiniest of debts by going so far as to sell the debtors themselves. Oh, a few bucks and can't pay. Take a stand on the slave block. Proceeds of the sale go to the person you owe. They trample helpless people in the dust and shove the oppressed out of the way. Amos 2:7. At their religious festivals, they lounge in clothing their debtors put up as security. In the house of their God, they drink wine bought with unjust fines. Amos 2:8. These people have the gall to think they're religious even though they're stealing from the poor. How you hate honest judges. You oppress good people by taking bribes and deprive the poor of justice in your courts. And that's Amos 5:10 and 12. You trample the poor, stealing their grain through taxes and unfair rent. Amos 5:11. These are folks who would tax widows selling a few loaves of bread and then use the money to buy a cruise ticket to Greece. And Amos has a message for hardcore crooks like these. Prepare to meet your God in judgment. Amos 4:12. Amos 7:17. The people of Israel will certainly become captives in exile, far from their homeland. To show just how crooked Israel is, God makes his point with a plumb line, a tool that builders use to make sure walls go up straight. I will test my people with this plumb line. God says he obviously finds the nation crooked because he quickly adds, I will no longer ignore all their sins. And that's Amos 7:8. God doesn't call the rich elite of Israel fat cats this late into their sinning. God isn't that polite. Instead, he says, listen to me, you fat cows living in Samaria, you women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, and who are always calling to your husbands, bring us another drink. Amos 4:1. In the original language, Amos is talking about the top breed of cattle, pampered in the fertile pastures of Bashan in what is now Jordan. The time will come, God adds, when you will be led away with hooks in your noses. Every last one of you will be dragged away like a fish on a hook. You will be led out through the ruins of the wall. Amos 4:2 and 3. That time in 722 BC, Israel boldly decided to stop paying its required annual taxes to the Assyrian Empire. So Assyria's king Shalmaneser brings an invasion force to collect the taxes and everything else of value. After surrounding the capital city of Samaria and for 3 years cutting off their supplies, the Assyrian soldiers forced the starving citizens to surround. Shalmaneser doesn't want to deal with this rebellious nation again, so he deports all the leading citizens, Israel, and the 10 Jewish tribes that once made up this nation, and scattered abroad. Amos 9:14. I will bring my exiled people of Israel back from distant lands, and they will rebuild their ruined cities and live in them again. This upbeat promise ends the book, but it might seem perplexing to those who know history. That's because of the lost tribes of Israel. They're still lost. The 10 northern Jewish tribes never return home. As far as the Bible tells, Assyrians repopulate the northern Jewish homeland with foreign pioneers who intermarry with the sparse Jewish population left behind. They produced a race that the southern Jews grow to despise, Samaritans. Many Jews come to think of Samaritans as racial and spiritual half-breeds with mixed blood and a mixed up religion that recognizes only the first 5 books of the Bible, and an edited version at that. God's promise is to restore the fallen house of David, and that's in Amos 9:11. That doesn't necessarily include the northern Jewish nation. The northern nation seceded from the Jewish Union and from David's dynasty about 200 years earlier. Judah in the Southland is the tribe that kept crowning David's descendants as king. That ended in 586 BC when Babylon did to them what Assyria had done to Israel in 722 BC. The difference is that the exiled southern Jews are released about 50 years later. Many returned home to rebuild their country. Some Jewish scholars say Amos' promise about the restoration of David's dynasty refers to more than just the reparation of Jews after the Persians overrun Babylon and free the political prisoners. They say it points to an ideal time in the future when the Messiah reigns over Israel. Many Christian scholars too say it refers to the Messiah and to his second coming. They describe the church as the new Israel. And we also know Israel will not return to their homeland until around the end, because it's one of the signs of the end times. And they say that all the nations refer to the Messiah's kingdom. Israel will possess what is left of Edom, and all the nations I have called to be mine. They will never again be uprooted. Amos 9:12 and 15. Some Bible prophecies work on 2 timelines at once. In the prophet's era and in the distant future, it could be that God wants readers to see both. In this promise, Israel's restoration in ancient times and the world's restoration still to come. And we know that the world will not be restored until after the day of judgment, until true hell on earth comes, when the Antichrist reigns for 7 years. And then all evil be wiped out after that 7 years, and God built his kingdom on the new heaven and new earth, when this heaven and earth are destroyed. So I believe he was pointing to end time prophecy there too, because a lot of it lines up, as well as he was referring to the coming of the Savior and the second coming as well. And like I was saying, the Jewish nation coming back to their homeland after all the years of being away is an end time sign. When the Jews start showing back up and the temples start being restored, that's a sign of the end. So I believe Amos was pointing to that. Stay blessed, stay caffeinated, and keep your eyes peeled, because prophecies are being fulfilled now. We all know that time is short. So I hope if you're not ready that you become ready. And if you are ready, I'm ready to celebrate with you with Jesus up in his holy kingdom. Much love.